Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests. We would like to welcome you all to our event. The Australian Alumni Association of Cyprus and the Department of Psychology of the University of Cyprus gladly welcomes you to the first official presentation of the book Tales of Cyprus, a Tribute to a Bygone Era by Mr. Constantinos Emmanuelle. We would also like to welcome our honorable guests, and namely, Mr. Alexandros Kais, who is representing the Honorable Mr. Fotis Fodiou of the Presidential Commissioner, His Excellency Mr. Sam Beaver, Australia's High Commissioner in Cyprus, Professor Tassos Christofidis, Rector of the University of Cyprus, Professor Georgia Panagiotou, Head of the Department of Psychology of the University of Cyprus, Mr. Sakis Fidoyannis, President of the Australian Alumni Association of Cyprus, who is also the co-organizer of the event, and of course, our distinguished guest and author, Mr. Constantinos Emmanuelle. Lastly, but not least, Professor Haris Psaltis, Associate Professor of Social and Developmental Psychology of the Department of Psychology of UCY and Director of the University's Center for Field Studies, who will also be our keynote speaker. So let's start with a short biography of the author. Constantinos Kostas Emmanuelle is an Australian-born Cypriot artist living in Melbourne. Before Tales of Cyprus, Kostas was busy creating culturally inspired art and exhibiting his work in a number of successful group and solo exhibitions. Over the past 25 years, he has been teaching art and design at various tertiary institutions, both in Australia and overseas. He has also enjoyed an illustrious career working as an illustrator, graphic designer, visual artist and photographer. He is married to Dr. Christina Pavlidis, an archaeologist and London-born Cypriot. They have 4 children and a cat called Stampy. I would like now to call Professor Tassos Christofidis, Rector of the University of Cyprus, to begin with a short welcome. Please, Mr. Christofidis, would you please take the podium?
Your Excellency, High Commissioner of Australia, dear representative of the Presidential Commissioner for Humanitarian Affairs and Overseas Cypriots, dear President of the Cyprus Australian University Alumni Association in Cyprus, distinguished guests, dear colleagues and friends, dear students, it is with great pleasure that I welcome you to the University of Cyprus for the presentation of the book by Mr. Constantinos Emmanuelle, Tales of Cyprus. On this occasion, I am pleased to see the ongoing collaboration between the Department of Psychology and the Australian University's Alumni Association in Cyprus. I am also very pleased and very happy to see the strengthening of the ties between our colleagues and the Commissioner for Humanitarian Affairs, Mr. Fodiou. It is worth mentioning that the University of Cyprus is ready to sign a memorandum of understanding with the Presidential Commissioner, which focuses on empowering the people of diaspora and has as a goal to engage them to participate in activities of the University of Cyprus. The agreement aims to provide expatriates with information regarding tools and media at the university that they will be able to use in the framework of lifelong learning. Moreover, the MOU includes a number of scholarships, both undergraduate and graduate scholarships, to be awarded to expatriates who wish to study here in Cyprus. As a university, we recognize the passion of the people of diaspora, their pure love for their country of origin, and concern for promoting their country's interest. People of diaspora are powerful ambassadors of our culture and interests abroad. They are, if I may say so, diplomats with impact in the community they work and live. They care deeply for their country of origin and have kept in their heart the ingenuity and authenticity of the word of Cyprus: hospitality, honesty, respect for the nature and their surroundings. All these characteristics have been captured in the author's book, Tales of Cyprus. And may I say, what a seductive book title, referring to a past era of innocence, of true concern for our country. The University of Cyprus puts great emphasis on research on our diaspora, internally displaced people, refugees and relatives of the missing people in both communities of Cyprus. Moreover, via the project University of Diaspora, we aim to host eminent professors of diaspora for giving lectures at the University of Cyprus. It is an acknowledgement of their work abroad and an opportunity to collaborate and enhance the benefits of exchange and transfer of knowledge. Additionally, every summer, the University of Cyprus actively participates in the NEPOMAC Discover Cyprus program, hosting youngsters of diaspora to the University of Cyprus to study at the School of Modern Greek, visit the campus, and communicate with the students and the academic community. Dear friends, it is with great interest I have read the summary of the great life project of Constantinos Emmanuelle. While reading the stories of Cypriot immigrants, you realize that life was not easier, but the people had a better understanding of what they really needed in the pursuit of happiness. Constantinos Emmanuelle produced a work which is a documentary of the past, a journey of the author to discover the ancestral roots, a testimony of coexistence of the communities. It is an opportunity to reflect on the past, realize the different circumstances and contexts, and discuss where we wish to go. The project is, if I may say so, a nostalgic time travel to the past. It is also a work of art with a depiction of beautiful paintings and pictures. I would like to congratulate Constantinos Emmanuelle for this excellent work that I am sure many of my colleagues, myself included of course, and our library will utilize to a great extent for their scientific endeavors. Thank you very much for being here, and I would like to express again, once more, my happiness for hosting this event here at the University of Cyprus. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rector. I would like to call on Professor Georgia Panagiotou, Head of the Department of Psychology of University of Cyprus, to present her speech.
Your Excellency, the High Commissioner of Australia, dear representative of the Presidential Commissioner for Humanitarian Affairs and Overseas Cypriots, dear President of the Australian Universities Alumni Association in Cyprus, dear Mr. Constantinos Emmanuelle, dear colleagues, friends of the University of Cyprus. It's my honor also to address this wonderful book presentation as chair of the Department of Psychology. We're very happy to support the initiatives of the Australian Universities Alumni Association in Cyprus and to be presented with this book based on research conducted with Cypriots living abroad. I should note that as a representative of the psychology department, we have a strong affiliation with Australia because we have a lot of colleagues, collaborators in psychology currently at Australian universities. We actually have a graduate of our PhD in clinical psychology who immigrated to Australia recently and works there as a psychologist. And I think psychology programs in Australia are quite similar to the structure of our own program. So I look forward to even further collaboration and perhaps more formal initiations of exchange visits and shared academic missions. I think there's a lot of room for collaboration. Regarding this book, I think that as a small island, Cyprus forms its bridges with the outside world through the experiences brought back by people who left the island for various reasons. Modern technology, ease of travel, and communication makes distances become progressively more relative and turns people into citizens of the world with progressively shared values, ideas, and influences. The author, however, a world citizen himself, reminds us of the richness of our own cultural tradition and the knowledge we can gain from turning to our past about things we want to keep, things we want to eliminate, and things we want to do differently. There's a lot of richness from the short summary I have read of the book, from the experiences of people of the past, the good and the bad in Cyprus history. Yes, I was quite fascinated after reading the summary of the book and looking at the webpage. I was quite taken by the pictures, the drawings, the illustrations, and also the rich methodology and approach, which as a psychologist I found quite fascinating. The book includes original drawings, interviews, stories, and photos. As a clinical psychologist, I was actually fascinated and was wondering about the memories that people bring along from a long time ago. How close are these memories to reality? How are memories changed by distance and time, pain, nostalgia, and a changed lifestyle and a changed culture that people are embedded in. Many of us lived abroad for a long time, completing our studies elsewhere outside of Cyprus. And we all had the experience of how we compare our home country to the new home country we lived in, both critically and in an idealized manner. So I would be quite eager to find more about the book and find more about the memories of the people who were interviewed. I'm sure that as a psychologist, my colleague, Haris Psaltis, will address in greater depth both the objectivity and the subjectivity of the material presented, both the realities of a previous innocent era and the idealization that results from nostalgia, distance, and loss. I congratulate the author, Mr. Constantinos Emmanuelle, on collecting this voluminous information, a lot of interviews, a lot of material, a lot of historical documentaries that are themselves a rich wealth of information for other researchers to utilize. And I also congratulate my colleagues for organizing this event. And closing, I just want to wish you every success with the promotion and dissemination of this book and the utilization and understanding of the information included so that we can better comprehend our history and our future. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, Dr. Panagiotou. I would now like to call upon the President of the Australian Alumni Association, Mr. Sakis Fidoyannis, to present his speech.
Professor Tassos Christofidis, Rector of the University of Cyprus, Presidential Commissioner Representative, Australian High Commissioner of Cyprus, Mr. Biva, Dr. Georgia Panagiotou, Head of the Department of Psychology, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Australian Alumni Association of Cyprus, I would like to welcome you to the presentation of this very important book, Tales of Cyprus, and I would really ask you to join me to welcome Constantinos for being here with us and for making this trip. And after 7 or 8 months that we've been discussing, we managed to have him here tonight. Thank you. I'm sure that Dr. Haris Psaltis, as well as the author, will help us to appreciate the book and the significance and groundbreaking work with their talks. Before I go any further, I would really like to thank the University of Cyprus and the Department of Psychology, and in particular Dr. Haris Psaltis, for their collaboration and their hospitality in this room. And it is not the first time, and we really hope that it will not be the last. And of course, I would like to thank the Australian High Commission, Mr. Beaver, for their invaluable support. Before I say anything else, though, I would really like to welcome a couple of other people who I think we should acknowledge their presence here today. And this is Mr. Stelios Angelodimou, the president of the Cypriot community in Melbourne. There he is over there. And a person who I found out that was very instrumental in the first presentation in Melbourne of Constantinos' book, Ms. Jenny Webb. Thank you very much for being here. And for those who are not aware of the Australian Alumni Association and what we do, let me just briefly tell you a couple of things. The first objective for us is to bring together, connect and support graduates from Australian universities living in Cyprus. We aim to establish and foster closer academic, social, cultural and business links between Australia and Cyprus. And we try to organize and host activities such as this, academic, cultural and business activities, so that we can achieve our objectives. We like to think that whatever we do as an association, it is for the benefit of both Cyprus and Australia. And I think that this is a fine example of those objectives. When I learned about the book and the work of Constantinos via his Facebook page and website, I immediately felt that it was a substantial piece of work and had to bring it to Cyprus. So we spoke with Constantinos in January and we got the ball rolling. Here we are today, presenting a book written by a person who was born in Melbourne, who is working and making a significant contribution to the cultural life in Australia as an educator and an artist, but at the same time, he's delving into his cultural roots and he's offering immense services to Cyprus. He began a personal crusade, as he calls it himself, to learn, to record, and to bring to the forefront a way of life in Cyprus before the 1950s, as well as issues of migration through the eyes, the images and voices of his parents and other elderly Cypriots living in Australia and other parts of the world. He's been working hard because he fell in love with what he discovered. He fell in love by researching and discussing the lives of those people in Australia and elsewhere. And without any public support, funding, he worked very hard for several years, and at the end of 2018, he presented the book in Melbourne, his evaluation and understanding and appreciation of the era and the wisdom of the people who lived through it. As far as I'm aware, Tales of Cyprus is the first of its kind. It is groundbreaking. It creates bridges between Australia and Cyprus. It creates bridges between people and the periods in both countries. As for the Australian Alumni Association, this presentation fits well and fits like a glove with the identity and authority and priorities. We wish to thank Constantinos for being here tonight and for the trust and collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fidoyannis. I would now like to call upon the representative for the Presidential Commissioner, Mr. Alexandros Gais.
Δυστυχώς ο κύριος Φώτης Φωτίου, Επίτροπος Προεδρίας, δεν μπόρεσε να παρευρεθεί και τελευταία στιγμή έπρεπε να έρθω εγώ. Your Excellency, Honorable Professor, κυρίες και κύριοι, είχα τη χαρά να παραστώ και στην παρουσίαση του βιβλίου του Κωνσταντίνου Εμμανουήλ την περασμένη Πέμπτη στο Τεχνολογικό Πανεπιστήμιο Κύπρου. Η όλη παρουσίαση, τα όσα αναφέρθηκαν από τους ομιλητές και τον συγγραφέα και το ενδιαφέρον και οι εντυπώσεις των προσκεκλημένων και του κοινού έκαναν εντονότερη για μένα την πεποίθηση που εξέφρασα ότι δεν επρόκειτο για μια απλή παρουσίαση βιβλίου, αλλά για την αποκάλυψη των ενδότερων της ψυχής ενός επίλεκτου και ξεχωριστού μέλους της ομογένειάς μας στην Αυστραλία, που έχει σταθερά και βαθιά μέσα στην καρδιά του την ιδιαίτερη του πατρίδα, την Κύπρο μας. Σημείωσα ότι για το βιβλίο αυτό ο Κωνσταντίνος Εμμανουήλ εργάστηκε με μοναδικό πάθος, συγκεντρώνοντας για 7 χρόνια τις ζωντανές αναμνήσεις και τις ιστορίες 40 και περισσότερων ηλικιωμένων Κυπρίων, οι οποίοι γεννήθηκαν και ζούσαν στην Κύπρο κατά το πρώτο ήμιση του 20ου αιώνα. Έγραψε ο Κωνσταντίνος στην προσωπική του σελίδα στα μέσα κοινωνικής δικτύωσης ότι πρόκειται για μια σταυροφορία που ανέλαβε προκειμένου να διερευνήσει την πατρίδα των γονιών του που όπως ήταν πριν από το 1950. Με τις αναρτήσεις του που περιλαμβάνουν όμορφες και σπάνιες παλιές φωτογραφίες, σκοπεύει, είπε, να αναδείξει και να εξυμνήσει την πολιτιστική του κληρονομιά. Και συνεχίζει να το κάνει αυτό, αποδεικνύοντας και κάτι άλλο, ότι οι ρίζες μας είναι πολύ δυνατές και αντέχουν στον χρόνο, δημιουργώντας γέφυρες μεταξύ διαφορετικών τόπων, ανθρώπων και χρονικών περιόδων. Ένας επιστήμονας της Διασποράς, ένας καλλιτέχνης που γεννήθηκε και μορφώθηκε στην Αυστραλία, όπου δημιουργεί και συμβάλλει στην πολιτιστική ζωή της νέας του πατρίδας, προσπαθεί να διατηρήσει παράλληλα την ταυτότητα και τις πολιτιστικές του ρίζες, ανιχνεύοντας με τις αναμνήσεις και τις θύμισες των μεγαλύτερων στον τρόπο ζωής μιας άλλης εποχής. Οι ιστορίες της Κύπρου του Κωνσταντίνου Εμμανουήλ επιβεβαιώνουν όμως και κάτι άλλον ακόμα, τους πολύ ισχυρούς και ακατάλητους δεσμούς των όπου γης αποδήμων μας με την Κύπρο. Αυτοί οι δεσμοί μας προσφέρουν μια τεράστια δύναμη στον αγώνα μας για την προώθηση μιας ορθής, δίκαιης και βιώσιμης λύσης του εθνικού μας προβλήματος. Οι εποχές άλλαξαν βέβαια. Το σήμερα είναι πολύ διαφορετικό από το χθες. Δεν είναι αυτές που περιγράφει στο βιβλίο ο Κωνσταντίνος Εμμανουήλ, όταν, για παράδειγμα, χριστιανοί και μουσουλμάνοι συζούσαν σχετικά αρμονικά. Σήμερα έχουμε να αντιμετωπίσουμε την πρόκληση που ονομάζεται τουρκική επιβουλή. Έχουμε να αντιμετωπίσουμε τα τετελεσμένα της εισβολής και της προσπάθειας της Τουρκίας να θέσει υπό τον έλεγχό της ολόκληρη την Κύπρο και την Ανατολική Μεσόγειο. Το ποιες είναι οι πραγματικές προθέσεις της Τουρκίας για την Κύπρο και την περιοχή υπογραμμίζεται καθημερινά με δηλώσεις και ενέργειες που προκαλούν για την αλαζονία και την έπαρσή τους, αλλά και με τη σύγκρουσή τους με κάθε έννοια δικαίου. Παρόλες τις δυσκολίες, εμείς εμένουμε στην απόφασή μας να εργαστούμε για την επίτευξη μιας λύσης που να εξυπηρετεί τα συμφέροντα όχι της κατοχικής δύναμης, αλλά όλων των Κυπρίων που στοχεύουν σε μια ελεύθερη και ασφαλή πατρίδα με κατοχυρωμένα και διασφαλισμένα τα ανθρώπινα δικαιώματα και τις βασικές τους ελευθερίες. Οφείλουμε να αγωνιστούμε για να ανατρέψουμε τη σημερινή απαράδεκτη κατάσταση πραγμάτων στο νησί μας. Ναι, άλλαξαν οι εποχές, αλλά δεν μπορούν να παραγραφούν ή να διαγραφούν οι ιστορικές, εθνικές και θρησκευτικές μας καταβολές. Η λύση δε που επιδιώκουμε να επιτευχθεί θα πρέπει δίχως άλλο να διασφαλίζει τη συνέχεια του ελληνισμού σε αυτήν την εσχάτια της Ανατολικής Μεσογείου. Κυρίες και κύριοι, συγχαίρω και πάλι θερμά τον συγγραφέα του βιβλίου, στον οποίο σημειώνω επέδωσα τον περασμένο Ιούλιο στη Μελβούρνη ειδική πλακέτα με τις θερμές ευχαριστίες του Προέδρου της Δημοκρατίας. Είμαι σίγουρος ότι θα συνεχίσει το πολύ αξιόλογο έργο του ως επιστήμονας, καλλιτέχνης και δημιουργός, προβάλλοντας την κυπριακή πολιτιστική κληρονομιά μέσα από την έρευνα και τις τέχνες. Συγχαίρω επίσης τον Παγκύπριο Σύνδεσμο Αποφύτων Πανεπιστημίων Αυστραλίας και προσωπικά τον πρόεδρο του συνδέσμου, κ. Σάκη Φιδογιάννη, και τις προσπάθειες προβολής και διάδοσης του βιβλίου, όπως και το Τεχνολογικό Πανεπιστήμιο Κύπρου και το Πανεπιστήμιο Κύπρου για τη συνεργασία τους. Εύχομαι σε όλους κάθε καλό.
Thank you, Mr. Guys, for presenting Mr. Fotio's speech. And I would like to call upon Mr. Sam Beaver, the High Commissioner of Australia.
Thank you. Well, to our hosts from the University of Cyprus, Professors Christofidis Panagiotou and Saltis, representative of Presidential Commissioner Fotiu, President of the Australian Alumni Association, particularly our special guest, Con, welcome. And also welcome to all of those here tonight whose hearts and history are divided between two great island nations. Yuma, welcome. In this International Year of Indigenous Languages, I welcome you in the Ngunnawal language of the First Nation of the city of Canberra, where I'm from. I do so in acknowledgement of the continuous connection First Australians have to their land, to their culture, and to their language for over 60,000 years. The International Year of Indigenous Languages encourages people to learn more about Indigenous language, to preserve, revitalise and promote them. When we learn each other's language, we learn each other's history, our culture, our customs and traditions. And in this way, language can serve as a bridge. So too can social historiography, such as the personal stories that are told in Tales of Cyprus. Painstakingly curated over almost a decade, Tales of Cyprus speaks of this island before division. It speaks of a time when Con's late father, Miltiades Neophytou, described living together in harmony, Muslims and Christians together, like brothers and sisters. And that's what sets Tales of Cyprus apart. It not only looks back to a time before 1950, it does so from the perspective of a far distant land. The stories told are those of the Cypriot Diaspora in Australia, a diaspora with abiding connections to their birthplace, but who also helped build a prosperous, multicultural and modern nation. Today, there are anywhere between 40 and 100,000 Australians of Cypriot heritage from both communities living in Australia. Cypriots are well and truly embedded in all walks of Australian life. Cypriots have represented Australia with pride on the sports field. They've won gold medals. They've excelled on our netball courts. They've kicked goals on soccer and football pitches. In business, the CEO of Australia's second largest health insurer, Medibank Private, is a Cypriot. So too is the CEO of the Special Broadcasting Service, our national television station, which is the multicultural voice and the multicultural image of our nation. Cypriots have and are contributing to public life through arts and politics at the local, at state and at federal levels. But beyond these luminaries are the many thousands of Cypriot Australians who our current Prime Minister might well describe as quiet Australians. They are those who go about their daily lives looking after their families, putting their children through school, toiling an honest day's work, and contributing to their community. And so in reverse, Cypriot Australians who've chosen to return back here to Cyprus, and many of whom are here tonight, maintain an equally strong connection to both countries and contribute greatly to society here. It's in thanks in large part to their efforts, to their creativity and their dedication that events like this evening can take place. And I'd particularly like to thank Sakis and his team at the Alumni Association for all the work that they do as brand ambassadors for Australia. But the pioneering group that forged new lives in a far distant land is ageing. Those that experienced a very different Cyprus than that of today are passing on. Tales of Cyprus captures their stories. It captures their memories and it is their legacy. Tales of Cyprus is a treasure for future generations. It provides a roadmap to guide them back to their ancestry and to help them to better understand how it is that they got to where they are today. I commend it to you in the strongest possible terms, and I congratulate Con once again on his very significant achievement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. High Commissioner. Ladies and gentlemen, to continue, I invite the Associate Professor of Social and Developmental Psychology of the University of Cyprus, Dr. Haris Psaltis, who is also our main speaker, to come to the podium. Mr. Haris.
I'm really happy and honored to be able to present to you tonight the work of Constantinos Emmanuelle. The book Tales of Cyprus, a tribute to a bygone era, is really a great contribution to many disciplines, and I'm sure many of our colleagues here will appreciate the work immensely, and I will explain why later on. Kostas is an Australian-born Cypriot artist living in Melbourne. Before Tales of Cyprus, Kostas was busy creating culturally inspired art and exhibiting his work in a number of successful group and solo exhibitions. Over the past 25 years, he has been teaching art and design at various tertiary institutions, both in Australia and overseas. He has also enjoyed an illustrious career working as an illustrator, graphic designer, visual artist, and photographer. But allow me to say that what we discuss here tonight is a real life achievement, something that contributes to many of the fields we do research here, like history, sociology, anthropology, political culture, social and developmental psychology. Our librarians already requested copies of the book for our new library, and I'm very happy to see colleagues here who responded to my invitation to come to such an important presentation for us academics. I have absorbed every sentence of this book with great interest. Each one of his reconstructions of more than 40 oral history accounts of both Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot migrants to Australia and the UK is a gold mine for all these disciplines interested in comparisons between contemporary and past Cypriot society. Kostas has spent the last 7 years interviewing the people behind the migration, asking who they are, what prompted their departure, and what life was like in the Cyprus they remember. This great undertaking took endless interviews and countless photographs and has yielded several design projects and exhibitions and a fascinating website one can browse here. And take a note of this because much more actually is available beyond the book that we are presenting tonight at this webpage here. I noted with interest an interview of Constantinos in Cyprus Mail. He said, "As a society, we may be richer in terms of material wealth, but in many ways we are poorer than past generations. When you speak to Cypriots who remember what the island was like between 1920 and 1950, you get the sense that they had a wonderful life. They were poor, things were hard, but they were content with what they had. That seemed to be the primary message, and once I realized that Cyprus in the past was a whole different world, I had to go and investigate. One could, of course, argue that Kostas takes a rather nostalgic and idealistic view of the past. One might want to inquire whether we get a biased view of life back then, given that we only have the chance to get the oral accounts of survivors of migration, poverty of those times, and of course have no resource to the accounts of countless people who got lost either due to illness, lack of vaccination programs or health systems, low level of education, or individual differences in resilience. But all these can only be brought as questions because of the clear reconstructions and reflections that Kostas made available to us. I'm sure Kostas has thought of all these issues, and he might want to reply later on. I have also appreciated the reflective stance of Kostas and the clear way of communicating his conclusions. We can read on his website a number of booklets summarizing some of the truths, as Kostas calls them, that he discovered through his research. You can all read some of these astute observations here. It's again on the website, made available by Kostas. So here are some of these home truths that codified by Kostas. One, those who had a lot less in life often seemed more content. Two, Christians and Muslims in Cyprus once lived in relative harmony. Three, children in the old days were better prepared to cope with the world around them. Four, it was easier for past generations to find someone to marry. Five, people lived off the land and home cooking reigned supreme. Ignorance was bliss. People used to worry more about surviving and less about their looks. We once had a richer community spirit, a greater support network, and a better connected family structure than today. And finally, I take this to be out of Kostas' habit and hobby, the art and craft of photography is lost. Maybe you can explain more about that later. I do not want to take much more time talking about Kostas and his work, since I'm anxious myself to listen to Kostas speaking about this wonderful life project. But I would like to leave you with some of Kostas' own words that felt close to my heart, also from his booklet on bicommunal relations, where he concluded that Christians and Muslims in Cyprus once lived in relative harmony, referring to the period under examination. He limits his conclusion to this period, I think for a good enough reason. And let me read his commentary, which is based on a short visit to Cyprus months before the 1974 events, where he had the chance to attend a school for a few months, as I understood. Here are the words there. I soon began to see a clear picture emerging that my parents' generation did not have any ill feelings or thoughts towards the Muslim counterparts. This was quite a revelation. Many of the people I interviewed, some aged in their late 80s, expressed deep regret and even anger when recalling how the political opportunists and social agitators after 1950, seeking union with Greece, started to stir the pot of discontent. In fact, they created the pot. These agitators started the campaign of hate, lies, and fear across the island in order to change public opinion about the Turkish Cypriot minority that lived on the island. Their mission, it appeared, was to fracture and eventually ruin the relationship between the Christians and Muslims. I have therefore decided to avoid discussing politics or events that followed Cypriot independence in 1960 or leading up to the Turkish invasion of 1974. Inevitably, however, when discussing Christian and Muslim relationships on the island, many of my interviewees were anxious to explain to me their horror and outrage of having to witness their Muslim neighbors being forced out of their ancestral homes by young thugs with guns, In most cases, these recollections were shared with me with wet eyes and audible sobs. It may also interest you to know that in early 1974, before the invasion, I was attending school in the village of Arsos, where my teacher would often express his pro-Greek sentiments to the class about enosis or union with Greece. I would sit silently and watch in confusion, as this man kept reminding the class over and over again that the Turks were our enemy. So that's how the young get indoctrinated. When I finally gained the courage to question his ideology, he looked at me in an expression that could only be described as a mixture of anger and dismay and shouted, "We are Greek. We belong to the motherland." Well, I don't have to tell you how well that frame of thinking turned out for us. In our University Center for Field Studies and Genetic Social Psychology Lab, with my colleague, Dr. Irinika Dianaki, and our numerous students, we keep ourselves busy with research in both communities of Cyprus, exploring the quality of intergroup relations like trust, prejudice, forgiveness, representations of the past, and migration. We are just now embarking on a new project with our colleagues at Kent, Professor Neophytos Loizidis, which tries to explore the views of Greek Cypriot and Turkish Cypriot diaspora in Australia, the UK, Canada, the United States, and other parts of the world. Their views about how to resolve the Cyprus problem. So we are looking forward to our collaboration with Kostas and Sakis and the High Commissioner in helping us out with this project and locating relatives living abroad. And we expect our collaboration soon to be further enhanced, maybe with the signature of a new memorandum of understanding. So, Constantine, thank you very much for this excellent live project, and we are all ears ready to listen to your work.
Mr. Constantinos Emmanuelle. Thank you, Mr. Tsartis.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, family, friends, relatives, long-lost relatives as well, thank you for attending today. I'd like to thank the University of Cyprus and the High Commission and Sakis for helping to put this event together. It means a lot to me. I wanted the lights dimmed because I have a highly visual presentation. I'm taking a bit of a risk by trying to remember what I need to say, but hopefully the images on the slideshow will tell the story. I guess I wanted to explain a bit of the background behind the book, and I'll just see if I can get this going. Here we go. Now, as you can see, that's me, 1974, a fateful year. We arrived from Melbourne, Australia, with my family to settle in Cyprus, believe it or not. Before the days of mass media and the internet, my father had no idea what was about to happen. And my mother never really settled in Melbourne. She didn't really want to stay there, so the idea was to emigrate back to the homeland. And that was when my love affair started. I had a blissful, idyllic life playing in the village. I made 100 friends in the first day. We played outside from sunrise till sunset, and I got to see the way of life that I described in the book. And I was very fortunate because that's what I remember most about Cyprus. Living in the village with my yaya Bapu, looking at how they were able to work in the fields, and fresh goat's milk and halloumi. It was just fantastic. And despite the way it turned out, luckily my memories are very fond memories, and they've stayed with me ever since. But I do credit everything about Tales of Cyprus to this man. This is my father, Miftiadas Neophytou. He left the village at age 15. He was from Tsada in Paphos. He couldn't stand to see his parents suffer anymore, one more mouth to feed, so he decided to leave the village to go to Ktima and then Nicosia to work as a kitchen hand. And he often talked about his life in the village and how tough it was to grow up in Cyprus. But that was always mixed with memories of great happiness. And this is a story that has resonated with me on many levels, and it wasn't until I became a father myself when I realised how very wise my father was, an uneducated man, a shepherd really, who only went to 2 years of primary school, and yet made a decision in 1950 to leave Cyprus straight after the Second World War, one of the very first migrants. He chose Australia because he had a friend here, and then he, like most Cypriot migrants, he started a new life. He learnt the language, he found a job, and eventually he found a wife and 4 children later. He was able to call Australia his new home, but as I say, and with my father, I've inherited that love for the island. Every time I had a barabano, a problem to solve, my father would go back to his homespun village wisdom, and he often told me how he would have solved it and what life was like back in the old days. So if I complained too much about children playing too much with mobile phones, he would talk about the time when in the village there was no overweight kids. Everyone played outdoors. And they just didn't have the worries that we have today, even the young. It just seemed to be like they slept like logs, and that's why I say ignorance was bliss for many people back then. So I do credit my father with sowing the seed for me to develop Tales of Cyprus, and it wasn't until he passed away 7 years ago when I started to develop this cultural heritage project. And it started with the interviews and the stories, but mostly it was about the artwork. I never intended, really, to write a book. It wasn't something that happened from the beginning. It almost evolved by itself. But my first quest, I guess, was to create these drawings, these illustrations, these paintings about the Cyprus that he remembered, the way he described it. And so, the reference I had was vintage photos, and sometimes I would go back and just use my imagination to develop the scenes that you see in front of you. I had a number of exhibitions in Melbourne, as my guests have, my distinguished guests have mentioned. But it was the art that really drew the most attention. And then I developed a Facebook page, I guess, in 2014, so a few years ago now. And the idea behind the Facebook page was, once my father passed away, I thought I've got to preserve as many living memories as I can. It sort of dawned on me that my father was the last of his kind. His generation were the last of their kind that had lived a way of life that existed for thousands of years. And with their passing, we would never see their kind again. So that's when I went and started to interview as many elderly Cypriots as I could find. To date, I think I've conducted maybe 120 face-to-face interviews. There's 41 stories in the book. I would have liked to have put all of the stories in the book, but it would have been maybe 20 kilos in weight, which would have been too difficult for postage. So I had some, I guess, strict conditions with the interviews. I wanted to conduct the interviews in the native language. I wanted to videotape every interview, not because I wanted to share the video, but because it would have made it easier for me to capture all the stories. And I wanted to conduct the interviews myself in the homes of the residents. Most of the interviews were conducted in Australia, and especially my hometown of Melbourne, but I have conducted interviews here in Cyprus, in London and elsewhere. There are a majority of Greek Cypriot interviews. There's a few Turkish Cypriots. There's a few Maronite. Unfortunately, no Armenian. Although I did meet many elderly Armenian Cypriots, they just changed their mind at the end. My first challenge was to develop the trust, especially with the Turkish Cypriot community. They had to really understand that my quest was sincere, that I wasn't going to do anything sinister, and it sort of took a few years perhaps to gain that trust, not just with Turkish Cypriots, but also with Greek Cypriots. As many people said, there's nothing to talk about with the past. It was hard, it was tough. We suffered. What's there to say? And I wasn't really interested in the poverty. I was more interested in the family life and their memories of what they remembered growing up in Cyprus in the 20s and 30s and 40s. As you can see, the people that have migrated have developed a little ecosystem of themselves in whatever country they've settled. Little Cyprus everywhere you go. So every house that I would visit would take me back to the homeland. In fact, even before I entered the house, you could tell from the street which house was Cypriot. The olive tree, the lemon tree gave it away, the gologassi in the front yard. And of course, you enter the house and the first thing they want to do is feed you. The one thing that hasn't changed, a lot of things have changed in Cyprus, a lot of things have changed, but the one thing that has stayed the same, thankfully, is the hospitality, the philoxenia. And I was deliberately careful with my interviews. I had said to everybody I would arrive after breakfast or after lunch. I had stated that quite clearly, but it didn't matter because as soon as I arrived, this is what greeted me. And quite often I would eat 3-4 times a day. Sacrifice that I had to make. I put on 10 kilos putting on, developing the project. And then I'd have to go home to my wife who had prepared dinner. And of course I had to eat again. Not only did they feed me, but they also gave me lots of homegrown vegetables to take home, or ligor, whatever they had. And this has stayed with me ever since I was a little boy, that it's second to none. The Cypriot hospitality has to be second to none. I've never seen people, I've travelled the world, and it's just fantastic how generous in spirit and time, especially the elder generation are. So as many interviews as I've conducted, 120, I've had just as many knockbacks. Many a times I've travelled to houses with the promise that mum and dad were very keen to talk to me, only to have them change their mind. Maybe they were too shy. Or sometimes it was the children that changed their mind. So I had spent many kilometres driving around Melbourne and London to come back empty-handed. And that was just the price you pay. But thankfully, most of the contacts that I made, and this is where Facebook was really a great ally. I don't really like social media on the best of times, but for me, this was the best of social media, connecting me with people all around the world. I just want to share with you some of the stories that are in the book. You know, when you sort of develop an interview over time, you know, sometimes the interviews will take 3 or 4 hours. Sometimes I'd have to go back 3 or 4 times. Of course, they wanted to talk about the poverty. The very first thing they would mention is the poverty. And then we'll talk about the family connections. And you got this idea that sevasmo, respect, was first and foremost. The moral code was strict, but the one thing they wanted to really get through to me was that we were different. We were agape many, we loved each other, and family came first, no matter what. And the community, the village, did indeed raise the child. No one was left behind. The elderly were looked after, they were revered, and even the village idiot had lots of friends. And today, as a Gathiadi, as a lecturer at a university, I am witnessing with my own eyes the age of loneliness. We have many, many students who are aged between 18 and 25 who live online. They have many, many friends online, but I know they are deeply lonely and they do not have the social skills to develop the friendships like I used to, especially like my parents used to. So let me introduce you to my mother. This is the first story. Panayiotou Nyofitou, from a little village that many people don't know about, Mousseré, which is near Achimandrida in Paphos. My mother grew up in Paphos. Apart from visiting churches and monasteries, she didn't really leave the village. Very humble person. And then when she turned 27, her father announced that they were going to send her to Melbourne, Australia to marry a stranger. A good man, and thankfully he was a good man, and she obeyed. And I asked her once, why did you say yes? Why couldn't you say no? And she said, to disrespect my father, alimono. No way, you can never do that. It was a different world. And she boarded the ship with a pain in her heart, and she cried for a month on board the ship until she arrived to Port Melbourne in Melbourne, to the pier, and there was this stranger with baggy trousers, a very skinny man, she said, who did not resemble the photo that he sent her. Mind you, my father said the same thing. But they made it work. And, you know, to me as a father, you know, with 4 children, I'm in awe of their courage, their strength of character. They argued a lot, yes, as most Cypriot couples might, but they never threw in the towel. There was some strength that I've never really understood that they have. I can't imagine how you would be to send your daughter overseas, and it would have been hard for everyone. And they didn't really get to see their loved ones again. They started a new life. They had every intention to come back to Cyprus, but they got distracted. They got distracted by the need to raise a family and the need to survive and to start again. So yeah, she's my superwoman, Panayota, and I think she would be greatly embarrassed to know that I'm talking about her today. She's 94, living in a nursing home in Melbourne. She has Alzheimer's, and she holds her little doll as if it's a little baby. She rocks it back and forth. Anyone who's on Facebook would have seen lots of photos of her. But she's probably 3'11" in stature, but she's 6'4" in my eyes. It's just an incredible woman. I'll just go through some of the family album shots. And now we come to Eleni Dimitriou from Leonardiso. I didn't get to meet Eleni. I met her husband, Andreas Brastidis, and he told me about his lovely wife. And the story with Eleni was that when she was 9 years old, again from a very poor family, her parents sent her to a family in Varosi as a child servant, as was common in those days. And sadly for Eleni, it didn't turn out too good. She was abused by the men in the family, and she suffered a very terrible young childhood. Then thankfully when she was a teenager, she went to live with another family in Lefkosia here. Beautiful family, and they looked after her. And then when she was about 20, she made the trip with her mother and siblings to Australia. Her father had migrated earlier, about 20 years earlier. And so, almost an orphan child when you think about it. But again, incredible courage. And she became my cover girl. Just the passport photo is just incredible. The eyes, they speak volumes about the hardship and about her life. Wonderful, wonderful photographs of her upbringing. Here we have Andreas Aristovoulou, who talked about his father. Now, his father, Yorgos, was one of the many Cypriot volunteers who supported the British effort in World War II. Here's his photo taken in Limassol with his 3 other friends just before they left to go to Greece. He was captured by the Germans defending the port of Kalamata and sent to a concentration camp in Czechoslovakia. I can't remember the name. It's now the Czech Republic, of course. And he explained to me, Andreas explained that his father, unlike the Jewish prisoners, didn't suffer as much. In fact, if you look at this identity card, he actually put on weight. And in fact, if I go to the next slide, there, he's actually put on more weight because there's an agreement with the Red Cross that once a month they would drop a crate of food to the concentration camp, and the Cypriot prisoners were looked after. He was rescued, liberated, in fact, by the Russians, sent back to Cyprus, and sadly, like most returned servicemen, there was no great fanfare. They were returned to their rural life as before. Post-traumatic stress existed. This man was seen standing in the field often after returning from the war, completely naked for no reason at all. And we now think that might have been post-traumatic stress. Yet, again, one of those untold stories of these incredible Cypriots that had enlisted for various reasons. The main reason really was because the British paid them a salary. I think it was a few shillings a day, and they also got free cigarettes. That was the main reason, but of course they did feel patriotic towards, supporting England in the cause and the Allies. But there's not much written about the Cypriot volunteers. I think it's starting to change now, especially the volunteers from the First World War, the Mouladias, and I'd like to know more about that, their existence. Elias Pappas is the Maronite Christian in the book. I met him in London, and this is his parents' wedding photo. His mother is 15 in this wedding photo, and his father is 28. They had 2 young boys. Elias is one of them. And then, sadly, after the two boys were born in Aia Marina, the parents separated, which again was unheard of in those days. It was great resili to do that. And so what happened with his parents was they were shunned by the community, his mother and father separately. His mother left and went somewhere else and changed her religion to get a divorce. She became Orthodox and then eventually moved to London. His father remarried, and the two boys were raised by their maternal grandparents in Barossi. And Elias eventually migrated to London, where he was rejoined with his mother and told about his life as a young migrant, working in restaurants in London as a kitchen hand, and then eventually making enough money to buy a house. And that was the other thing with the migrants. They worked bloody hard, and in 5 years they had bought a house. And you know, we talk about the Australian dream. We used to have this thing called the Australian dream, where, you know, you could buy your house and own your house, and sadly those days are far behind us. And even my children, we are struggling to think how they would ever possibly own their own house in Australia. It's just a difficult situation. And yet these migrants worked 3 or 4 jobs at a time, and they were able to achieve, in Australia in any case, and I'm sure in London, the Australian dream. Agathi Constantino, I was fortunate even a few days ago to travel to Strumbi, which is a village. But let me just tell you about Agathi. She's 97 now, we think. She's not sure if she's 95 or 97, because again, back then the dates were a bit dodgy. But I think she's 97. She's alive and well in Melbourne. I met her when she was 94, a young 94. Very agile, really sharp of mind, and talked about Strumbi before the earthquake. And talked about how there were many men that were after her. She was a young, beautiful girl. And you'll see, you know, some of the photos here. I think I haven't got a young one, but yeah, she was living in Strumbi. Her father didn't want her to work in the field, so she learned how to embroider. And there was a young man that was after her for a hand of marriage, but her father didn't want him. Again, reputation is everything, family reputation, and everyone knew each other. So, you know, you've got to sort of claim your fame, as I say. And so she eventually married the village barber, Chrysostomos, who was madly in love with her. And she talked about how Chrysostomos would leave work and then come home and lay on top of the wood pile in the courtyard of his house, because from the wood pile he had a perfect view of Agathi on a balcony as she was doing her embroidery. And she didn't find out until after she was married. But then the earthquake happened, and again she talked about how lucky she was with the earthquake. She got up one morning to go to the spring, to fill her jug with water. Her friend said, "I'll go back and get and refill my jug." And Agathi said, "No, I'll go later." And that's when the earthquake struck. Her friend got killed, and Agathi survived. You know, just moments like that stay with you. 3 days ago, I was in Strumbi. I parked a car. I asked this gentleman, Elias, his name was, "Do you know anyone who might know Agathi Constantino?" He had heard about the Facebook page, strangely enough, and he said, "There's one old lady that lives here, Kyria Eleni, she's 92, she might remember." So we went to her house. Of course, I took my video camera, and there I conducted another interview, which now has been my 4th interview in Cyprus so far. You know, not bad for 10 days that I've been here, 8 days. I just can't help myself. It's an obsession now, I'm sure, maybe an addiction. So these are just some of the stories that are in the book. We talked about migration. Not everybody in the book has migrated or left Cyprus. Some of the stories have remained, some of the people have remained. The main reason people left Cyprus in the late 40s and early 50s was, of course, that after World War II, there was an economic crisis, there was a huge unemployment, and for those reasons, a lot of the young men left to seek a new life and to make money. Nearly everybody that I've interviewed, maybe at least 120 people, have said to me that they had every intention to return back home after 3 or 4 years, to make enough money and then come back home and start a new life. And for about 80% of them, that didn't turn out the way they had planned. I don't know how many people know about the Corsica. I certainly had heard about it only through the stories, but then I discovered when I delved into it that the Corsica is in fact our very own Cypriot Titanic. It's an incredible story when you think about it. It left Limassol on the 13th of December 1951, and arrived in Melbourne 2 months later, an incredible 2 months later. It was never seaworthy. It should never have been allowed to bring 800 Cypriots, the largest contingent of Cypriots ever to leave Cyprus. And they made the journey with 6 out of the 12 boilers were working, 1 out of the 2 propellers was working. It was on a constant lean. The cargo of rotten the cargo of potatoes had rotten, the onions and the potatoes, and so the stench was all powerful. They had to dump the potatoes at Colombo. And then 3 days out of Fremantle in Australia, they ran out of fresh water. And so my next quest, my next book, of course, is going to be about the Corsica. And I'm at the moment interviewing the survivors from the ship. And so far, I've met about 24 people who are now in their late 80s, early 90s, who remember the Corsica very well. You can see some of the pictures here. They don't look too distressed in the photos, but a lot of them remember it as the ship of hell, they describe it. And it's a miracle that they made it to Australia at all. 120 pounds it cost them, which was double what they would have paid if they went to London. Even the Australian newspapers got wind of it, and so on the day that it had arrived in Australia, the local papers ran these articles, and you can see in the photos the lean of the ship was so great that the passengers on the ship could actually touch the hand of their loved ones standing on the pier. Quite incredible. I never knew about the Corsica until I started Tales of Cyprus. I didn't know much about malaria or leprosy or Mehmet Aziz or the guy that designed the flag. It's been quite an education. Those who chose to start a new life in other countries, and as I've mentioned, Australia, the Great Britain, South Africa, Canada, America, incredible heroes for me, because not only did they have to master the new language, they also had to embrace a new culture. But they were able to do it incredibly. They were able to manage to get jobs, raise families, get married. And there they have it, you know, just incredible. Just some of the photos. I've got hundreds of photos of people in the 1950s. The photographs are important. I was very sort of conscious that when I decided to conduct the interviews, I thought I need to really scan the photos as well, because I knew quite clearly that the only people that could describe who was in the photos were the elderly Cypriots that I was interviewing. The children didn't know, and I had proven that many times. I had asked the siblings, the descendants, to describe photos, and they had no idea. So I took with me quite a bit of gear. I had the video camera, I had audio equipment, I had my scanner, my flatbed scanner, which was tough going when I was travelling through the mountains of Cyprus. It was quite heavy, but I had made a conscious decision to photograph, to scan the photographs, and then, of course, to caption every photograph. You know, the locations, the names of the people, and the dates. And the fallacy of memory, unfortunately, hasn't always been accurate. It would have been great had I also interviewed my parents a bit more, because some of the family photos that I have, I still don't know some of the people in there. But there's just something amazing when you look at old photos. You know, for many people, even though the photographs themselves might have cost a shilling, it was just too much. It was a luxury. But it was an art form, as was described earlier, that I think has been lost. I have at least 20,000 photos of my smartphone of my children, and those photos may never get printed. A lot of my students are obsessed with selfies, which again is a different sort of thing to witness. But every photo tells a story. You know, the old woman on the left is, she's 40. I'll just go back to that photo. She's 48 years old, the old woman. We say old. That's how tough the life was. She's holding the photo of her son who went to America, who died on the operating table, and she wanted him to be in the photo as well. Incredible. I pretty much know the background of every photo because I'm curious. This is the Shakespeare School in Lefkosia. I met one of the students who was 93 in Melbourne, and she was thankfully, you know, she was okay to tell me enough about her background. But you can see, you know, there's this honest beauty that you don't often find with modern day photography. People often tell me, why don't people smile in old photos? And I used to think it was just something to do with the photographer being strict, but then I discovered that they had very slow shutter speeds. Up to 6 to 8 seconds it would take to take a photo, and if you moved slightly, the photo will be blurred. And so the photographer kept instructing the sitters, don't move an inch, don't even smile. There's also a cultural, historical reason why people wouldn't smile, because it was seen that you were kind of showing off, that you thought you were better than everyone else, so you had to maintain a very sort of serious demeanour. So, in conclusion, what have I learnt? And I don't call them home truths anymore. There's so many lessons for me, but the obvious one is that life was tough. And, you know, it's not until you hear about the way these people survived the past that, you know, you realise you've got nothing to complain. And whenever I feel sorry for myself, I just think about this generation and I pull myself together. But yeah, life was tough, you know, they didn't take things for granted with the little they had. And as many people said, yes, there was poverty, but we didn't know we were poor because everybody was poor all around us. We just didn't know that we were so poor until much later on. Harry Chamari is in the story, is in the book, sorry, and he talked about the day that he bought his first watch. I can't remember, it cost him a few shillings. And he explained it like he had won the lottery. It was the happiest day of his life. He was the richest man in Cyprus. He bought himself a watch. And you hear this over again, the day they bought their first sewing machine or their first Rayleigh bicycle. Very simple people. Then isn't there? Very simple desires. But yeah, let's not be delusional here. Life was tough. I'm not making any claims that the past was better. It's true that they did coexist. In fact, I can probably conclude that of all the people I've interviewed, there's quite a few, they all agreed. Every single person agreed that they were friends with their neighbours. They went to each other's houses. They celebrated each other's festivals. On the left, you have Haki, with his best mate was an Englishman, and then at the top, I don't remember their names, but Turkish and Greek Cypriot enjoying a bottle of wine. And then you have Effie and her friend Akil from Dokni. And when you talk to Effie, she bursts into tears. She can't talk about the past because she's lost her best friend. These are really strong, deep-rooted friendships that have remained a pain in their heart until today. But yeah, I had no idea how strong the bonds were. The other lesson for me was that people ate what they grew. They lived off the land. There was no processed food in those days, no supermarkets, sustainable living like we don't know today. But they managed to also, they used the bartering system to get by. So they didn't sort of have disposable cash. I would give you my halloumi, you would give me a sack of wheat, I would sew you a dress, you would give me a garpuzi, and so on. And that's how people got by. And they managed to survive, and they walked everywhere. And this is the other thing that my doctor keeps telling me, you have to move more and eat less. Move more, eat less. And I'm trying to now adopt this way of life. He also told me you have to fast. You need to feel hunger. You know, we live in a 24-hour food cycle where we don't allow ourselves to feel hungry. In Australia, we have a serious epidemic of diet-related diseases. We have an obesity problem on a scale unprecedented. And it's quite alarming to see how many young people today they sit down for far too many hours and they don't move as much as they used to. So there's a lot of lessons we can learn just by remembering our past generation. And I've talked about this as well. It's been mentioned before that children did play outdoors a lot, and there was no overweight kids when I was growing up, and especially my parents' generation. But it wasn't just the weight, it was the friendships. Everyone had, I spent 4 months in Cyprus, and I had 1,000 friends. It was incredible. Everyone was your friend, and your parents didn't care. You can go out from sunrise to sunset. It was very safe, very, very safe. No one felt threatened, and I'm guilty of it now as a father in a metropolis like Melbourne. I'm a helicopter parent. I'm one of those parents that I barely sleep at night. I'm afraid of the children going too far from home, and it's an alarming statistic these days of the way we live our life. Family was everything, and this is incredible. You know, if an elderly person came to your home, you stood up and you greeted them. You know, there was such respect, and you know, you worked to support each other, and everyone lived together. They slept together in one big room, and the bonds with siblings has stayed strong ever since, even though they were apart. And that's why the family photos that I showed you earlier, sometimes that was the only connection to the homeland. And they became heirlooms, and that's why I think, you know, I'm glad that I've been able to scan the photos, because ever since I started this project, not only have half the people died, a lot of the photos have disappeared. Somehow, magically, mysteriously, they've disappeared. Less is more. Well, that's the thing that has really resonated with me. Ignorance is bliss and less is more. My grandfather, I have to admit, slept like a log. He had concerns about the weather, maybe about the locusts. He had genuine concerns, but he slept like a log compared to the way I sleep today. I worry about everything. You know, I get a mark on my hand, I think it might be cancerous, you know. We live in a 24-hour news cycle where, you know, every second week there's going to be some sort of catastrophe. And I just sometimes, you know, pine for the old days when we had black and white television with four channels. The book itself took you 2 years. I'll just show you some of the pages from the book. I have to admit, if I wasn't a graphic designer, this book would not have happened. It took me close to 2,000 hours to put together. First, I had to translate all the stories, scan the photos, make sure I had the design just right, and then we got it printed, and it was released in Melbourne last year, and here we are in Cyprus today with you to bring the stories to Cyprus. And as I end this presentation, I took the book to my father's village 3 days ago. My Pappas house was still standing. Of course, there's no one living. It's a mud brick home. And I said to my father, welcome home. I brought his, you know, he had travelled from 1950 and now had brought him back to home. And this is why, in many ways, Tales of Cyprus, it's a story of migration and my survival. But, you know, for me, it's very important, and I feel humbled to be here today because I've brought many of these migrants back to their homeland. And my poor father didn't get to come back as many times as he hoped. I don't know if we have time for questions. This is the best part for me. I'd like to see if there are any questions from the audience. But yeah, feel free to ask me. Thank you. So, does anyone have any burning questions I'd like to ask? Or have I answered them all? Surely not. There must be... Stelios, you must have a question.
Yes, I've got a question, actually.
Thank you.
You wrote this fantastic book, and we are very proud of you, Constantinos.
Thank you.
What about this artistic talent you got? Where are you going to have this beautiful exhibition?
Well, yeah, well, as you know, in the Cyprus community in Melbourne, for many years the walls were bare, and last year, Stelios, we had the Halloumi Festival, and thank you, Stelios, he had asked me if we could use my artwork to decorate the walls, and thankfully today we have lots of the artwork in the community clubhouse. My next artistic project is, it's a Village Girl series. I'm starting a quest where I'm creating a series of illustrations of a young village girl. I used a young Greek model from Australia with her father's permission. I took photographs, dressed her up. I was fortunate many years ago when I was in Buffalo, I bought an old village dress, 1920s I think it was, and so we dressed her up in the traditional village costume. And the series of portraits will be exhibited maybe in 2021, first in Melbourne and maybe in Cyprus. But I need to, I promised my 10-year-old daughter to have a rest because she has been living with Tales of Cyprus since she was born practically. And every time I go somewhere, we came to Cyprus 3 years ago, and εξαφανίστηκα ο πατέρας της. She couldn't find me, and my son said, don't worry, he's probably talking to some old lady, you know. And it was true. So she said to me, no more Tales of Cyprus, you have to now give it a rest. To be fair, I did most of the work during the night. So I started work at midnight and would work all night until 7 in the morning, get dressed, go to work, and then the next night crash in my bed. And so I didn't really sacrifice any family time. I didn't want to be a hypocrite to my family, but the artwork is there. My eyesight isn't as good as it used to be, so now I do a lot of the work with a bright light and mostly in pencil, and then I use Photoshop, digital program, to add the colour. Whereas once upon a time I used to paint with a brush. But yeah, my eyesight dystihos. But yeah, good question, Steos. Yes?
Are you planning to publish a book also in Greek or Turkish?
Yeah, look, that's a very good question. It's the most common question I get. I would love if someone from Cyprus would take the initiative to do this, because firstly, I don't have the skills. I didn't go to Greek school, so I don't have the skills to be able to do it myself. I don't have the time. But if there was anyone on the island who would be able to, I'm not pointing at anyone, but someone who would like to take the initiative, I would more than welcome in both languages, absolutely, yes. It needs to be published in both Greek and English and Turkish.
I would like to congratulate you.
Thank you.
You have done a great job. I identify with a lot of what you said, because I emigrated to Adelaide at the age of 14 and a half.
Wow.
Do
you live in Cyprus now?
No, I live in London.
London.
Traveling back and forth.
Lovely.
That's great.
Okay. Question over here.
Is Tales of Cyprus based on your childhood and personal experiences?
Oh, where's it? Oh, over there. Did you ask the question? You've got a microphone. So can you repeat the question?
Is Tales of Cyprus based on your childhood and personal experiences?
Not mine, because I'm not that old. It was dedicated to my father and his generation, so it's largely people that were born from 1915 to 1940. I wanted to capture the British era, if you like, and so, you know, it was really that story that I'm told, I don't know if this is true, but I'm told wasn't well taught in schools in Cyprus. I did a lecture 3 years ago at the English school, and this young girl in the front row said, you know more about Cyprus than we do. I also got in trouble a few years ago for calling it the golden era, you know, because for me, after interviewing all these people, I can't remember a time in Cyprus, in all its history, when there was relative peace, you know, and people talk about the English, but, you know, there was a time when everyone kind of got along despite the poverty. But, and people have said, what about the next generation, you know, the 1950s and 60s and 70s? And it just gets too messy. I don't want to touch that. It's just too political. And I'd rather remember the stories of my parents and grandparents and to honour their memory. Yes, Costa. That's a good question, and the answer is no. Surprisingly, the migrants have stayed in some sort of a time capsule. So when I was growing up, I lived a double life, you know, from the age of 2, you know, I remember at home I was Cypriot, 100% Cypriot. We had gologasi, we had chickens, I think we had a goat, and this is in Melbourne, Australia. So I was 100% Cypriot whenever I was indoors. Whenever I left, I was an Astralo. And I mixed with all my neighbours, multicultural. We had Yugoslavian, Italians, Australians, of course. My mother's worst fear was that I would marry an Aussie. And my father often taught, you know, this is the thing about my father, and we talked about his life. I remember being a pretty crappy teenager. I gave my father grief, as you do when you're a teenager. And I remember I had a toothache when I was about 17, and I had to get a lot of work done. It was so many fillings and 3 months, a lot of expenses. And my father said, why don't you take all your teeth out and get dentures like me? And I said, that's the worst advice any father could give their son. But he was thinking about the way it used to be. And then, of course, I couldn't get a job as a graphic designer, and he wanted me to come and work in the factory with him to drive a forklift. Again, I didn't listen to him. And when I turned 25, he was scared that I might marry, an Australesa. So he said, Sophie down the road, good Greek girl, marry her and you will learn to love her. That was his exact words. And of course, I didn't listen. When I did get married, I had my own teeth. I had a job as a graphic designer, and I married the woman that I met and loved. And so, we talk about, homespun wisdom, village wisdom, but he was only looking out for me, and that was the best he could do. So I can't fault him. Oh, yes, thank you. Sorry.
Thank you so much for documenting and preserving these stories. My parents were immigrants to South Africa, so I really relate and I love this. And I just want to ask, I discovered you through the Facebook page.
Yeah.
So now that you've done the book, will you continue with that, or is that chapter closed down?
The Facebook page? Yeah. Oh, no, I don't think I could. And this is the other thing with social media. People have said, do you ever regret not doing this 20 years ago? And imagine the stories you would have captured 20, 30 years ago. First, I didn't have the technology or the language skills. And, to be able to connect with people, I've always slammed technology. My students get sick of my sermons. But if it wasn't for social media, I would not have been able to connect with the world. And I would not have been here. Saki found me through Facebook. And so the Facebook page will continue. Already, I've got some interesting stories that I've discovered in Cyprus. I get up probably about 6 in the morning and go for a walk around Cyprus. And because I know old people get up early, I get to meet lots of the elderly from Larnaca, Lefkosia, and already I've documented some interesting stories. And each Facebook post takes about 6 hours to construct, as you can imagine. I'm very particular, I'm very fussy, so I always try to find some time. Maybe once a week I do a post, but that's why it's grown so great. And when you go to Ascarino, I met this guy Elias on the road, and he said, Tales of Cyprus, I know you, I'm a friend on Facebook. And this is a guy in a village in Cyprus. So it's the best part of social media, but it will continue, so keep looking. Yes?
Congratulations for a wonderful book.
Thank you.
I have to say that you have done an excellent job in reconstructing and presenting the truth, the spirit, the lifestyle, indeed, of a bygone era. Superb. And I know what I'm talking. I grew up in the same neighborhood where Neofidouin and Pelau were living. And it just happened that I went through all these nice things.
They're my grandparents, by the way.
Thank you. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
We talk later.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Do we have, how much time do we have? 2 more questions? Yes. 2 more, yeah. Do we have any more questions before we... Yep.
It's not a question, it's something that I actually read today and I laughed. Gold Rush, Victoria. A Cypriot jumped ship around 1850s, 1860s, Cypriot. They anglicised their names, and I really loved that. It was Johnson, Yohan, Yanni, John, Johnson.
I know. One of my best friends is Bruce Polides. He plays bouzouki. Incredible. And his real name is Lambros, but he grew up in country Victoria. And the stigma of being a wog, as they called him, New Australian, he just changed his name to Bruce. And, Banayodis became Penny, Constantinos became Con, Dimitri became Jim. It's reversing now. I taught at a Greek Orthodox school for a little while, and everyone's gone back to their traditional Greek and Turkish names, and it's been revival now. So, yeah, it's interesting the way they had to fit in. I think we're so thank you everyone for coming today. I hope you appreciated the presentation, and thank you to our distinguished guests. Was there a book signing later? Yeah. So I'll be here if you need. Yep. Thank you.
So we thank you Mr. Constantinos Emmanuelle, very much. Our warmest congratulations on this very important and interesting work. I found it interesting. So, ladies and gentlemen, and honorable guests, at this point, the book presentation has been completed, Tales of Cyprus, a tribute to a bygone era. The Australian Alumni Association of Cyprus and the Department of Psychology of the University of Cyprus would like to thank Mr. Constantinos Emmanuelle and our honourable speakers for their speeches and presentations. Thank you all for being here tonight to share this book launch. And a special thanks to those who have travelled a fair distance to be with us, which proves as a reminder of the importance of the work being done. And so we invite you all to acquire the book outside and to join us at the cocktail. And with Australian wine. So good evening to all. Thank you very much for being here.